Hello? Hello! How's everyone? Does anyone know what this looks like? Somebody just came up to me. What did I hear? A Connect 4. Yes. Thanks to the design team for bringing that to us. I think that's pretty cool. All right, welcome to the strategy track. We're going to get started with Ursula from the Huntington. So I'm going to read something which I normally don't, so I apologize, but I don't want to make any mistakes. So Ursula is the chief data scientist at Huntington. She's responsible for leading all the strategic direction and data management activities to drive business. She's also a champion for data management, governance, quality, data vendor relationships, et cetera, across all the business segments. She's been in banking for over 20 years, not just at Huntington, but a few other banks. Any Bowling Green graduates here? Woohoo! She's a Bowling Green graduate, also of Cleveland State and the Stonier School of Banking. So I asked Ursula backstage, I said, if you want the audience to take one thing away from your talk, she wants to make sure you appreciate that data and analytics, especially in the mind of a chief data officer, you should think of them like peanut butter and jelly. So please help me welcome Ursula Cottone to the stage.
Good morning. So thank you guys for having me. Very excited to be here in a room full of women. This is unlike normal presentations I give to data audiences. So thank you very much. She mentioned it, thinking about data and analytics like peanut butter and jelly. And so whether the title is Chief Data Officer, Chief Analytics Officer, Chief Data Scientist, data and analytics, data and architecture, all of those things have an underpinning of data. And so I want to talk a little bit about how important it is that data plays in the analytic lifecycle. All right? So I don't know how many of you just read recently the Harvard Business Review on March 11th said that women shouldn't use humor in presentations, that it negatively impacts the impression of women when they do presentations versus when men use humor in presentations. So let's see, I'm going to use a man's cartoon. Hopefully that helps in my humor space. But I like being able to start with something like this because I think it is about, my role is really about using data. And so if I think about using data, this cartoon just made me chuckle a little bit. And the idea that we only have bad data, but if it works, we'll call it good data. All right, have you heard enough about how data is like something? The new black, right? Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the difference between how I want to think about data. So I've heard it being called the new oil. I disagree. And I love this analogy. McKinsey actually, I'm borrowing it from them, is that it really is about water. So if you think about oil being hard to transport, costly to store, let's see what some of the other ones are. Can only be used by very specialized machines, right? Toxic if used improperly, and requires a lot of heavy governance and laws. So I don't want to think of data as oil. I'd rather think of it as water. And easily accessible. How many of us want data that's easily accessible to do our jobs? Two, produced in volume, not just gallons. It's inexpensive to transport and store. It's used in a variety of ways to create life. And probably something that normally people would think of when you look at a data person is governance. And I'm going to say when you are thinking about water, you want to use it judiciously. So if we think of that in those terms, this is about using governance to make it easier to do work as opposed to an impediment. Okay? So as we kind of go into this idea of how do we start to get real benefits, and I know I have a Huntington contingent out there, so happy to have you guys here with me. The idea of democratizing data access It's very easy, as I just said, with governance, to start to prohibit use of data. The goal should not be to prohibit the use. The goal should be able to make it accessible so that we can start to make data-driven decisions. Now, that's a very lofty goal, data-driven decisions. I'd probably say we're more in the data-led right now decision-making camp as opposed to driven, but that is ultimately where we want to go to be able to get the benefits. We also want to stop our dependency on people having to go back to legacy or source systems to get the data. Imagine how much more difficult that makes our analytics users' job to have to go back to source systems and understand those source systems in order to do their jobs. And ultimately, we want to be able to discover valuable business insights. So what does that mean? It means our teams are able to use the data because it is accessible and in a form that is usable for them to actually start to drive new business insights. So we got a number of our analytics teams here, and I know that they feel very passionately about that topic. So this is a picture I use quite regularly to describe the ecosystem that we are trying to create at Huntington to make this come to life and to be able to realize those outcomes and benefits that I just described. So I call it a data ecosystem. You can see the idea behind it is it's very simple, yet crazy complex behind the scenes. But the idea of capturing, organizing, and consuming your data. And I want users to care about the consumption side, not about the capturing side, not about the organizing. It doesn't matter what study you might read about, it'll say somewhere between 60 and 80% of analytic users' time is spent finding the data, aggregating it together, cleansing it, maintaining it, to be able to actually use it. Okay? So let's turn that into a month, right? Do I really want our users spending 3 weeks out of a month, maybe more, to do all of those steps when that could be done in a more centralized, efficient manner for everybody? That is the job of a chief data officer, is to make that environment accessible for folks. So this picture just helps me get people's heads around that idea that the behind-the-scenes folks should be worried about capturing and organizing, and all our users should have to worry about is the consumption side. Now, that doesn't work without the foundation that you can see there around managing, governing, and protecting our data. All very important, but used judiciously again. So the idea is not to prevent people from getting to data, but to make sure people have access to the right data that they need when they need it. Okay? And you can see some of those things you guys will know even better than I, how nice it is to have a data dictionary for the data, so you don't have to try and figure out what it is, to be able to know where it came from a lineage perspective, and to maybe even, let's go crazy, and hope that you can understand what the quality of that data is when you go to use it. So I hope you're starting to see the peanut butter and jelly. Like, these two things are not separate. There is no way for us to be able to say you could do analytics just free form without any help from making sure you have this structure. Imagine how much easier it is to do your role when you have these things in place. So strategic partnerships. Okay, so that's cool. I could build all that infrastructure that you just saw and make it easy for folks to get to. Doesn't work without these partnerships. So for us at Huntington, my team, our analytics team, our technology team are key components to helping the businesses achieve their goals and the strategy that they've laid out. So we've got some values at Huntington that are particularly tied into this. So service heart is one of them. Can-do attitude, and forward thinking. Well, in order to do forward thinking, in order to help people and move us in a direction that is different than where we are today, and that includes colleagues and customers, it's critical that this partnership exists so that we can actually help our analytics teams be able to do those three things, right? Think about the service from a customer perspective and for our colleagues. Think about how to get it done and ultimately help us do forward thinking, okay? So my role, the tech team and the analytics team together make up a very tight partnership that help our business teams. Now, the business teams are integral to us. If we don't understand their business strategy and where they're trying to go, I can't meet those data needs, right? So it's important. It is a strategic partnership across, and I am thrilled that I have that type of partnership at Huntington. It really has made our ability to make that ecosystem start to come to life much easier. I'd be remiss, as a chief data officer, I have to talk a little bit about governance, so bear with me for a moment. And I'm trying to make this come to life. So you might laugh at one of the roles I have on there. The idea behind this pyramid, it's also sized by the number of people that are interacting with the data, right? So I'm going to start at the top and move down. The executive leadership team is incredibly important to data and analytics at our company, and I think at every company. The idea is that our strategic executive leadership provide the guidance, the funding, and the support for our business strategies, the data strategy, the analytics strategy, right? Each of those areas have strategies. How do we pull that together? That happens with our executive leadership team. Then you've got senior leaders, so me and my peers, and that group helps us determine what's next on the roadmap for data. What are we going to focus on? So once we take that big picture strategy into some more tactics, what order are we doing those tactics in? The list could go on forever and ever. Think even about a dictionary or data quality. You could do that for hundreds of years. How do you prioritize? What is most important, and how does it align back to the strategy? That's what that senior leadership group does for me. They provide that guidance, and we together make those decisions about what's next. And then my favorite role on here, the pickle in the middle. So I'm probably dating myself. It's a game that we used to play as kids. And the idea behind it is that they are a set of people in the organization who are constantly bombarded with asks. I need a new report. I need some new data. I need you to do this analysis. Go figure out how to do this. And the stuff just keeps coming from the top down on them nonstop. And in many cases, when you don't have an ecosystem like that, those people run around to try and figure out how to solve the problem. And they do a fantastic job at it. And they have figured out how to get to what they need. They use the people on the front lines. They use people that they can find in every crevice of the company. They finally have, everybody's got a guy. Does not matter. I could ask every single one of those people I put into that bucket. We call them data trustees. And ask them, and they all have, I got a guy who can do that. I got a girl who can do that. And so they think, well, the ecosystem sounds great and all, but I don't know if I need it because I've already got somebody who takes care of that for me. This role of chief data, and for all of you as analytics professionals, need these people more than any other person on this picture. Because they are the ones that are going to help us figure out how to improve, make more efficient the processes, and to help us get that ecosystem up and running in a way that will be meaningful to you guys. Because as you probably have seen, if you leave it completely in the hands of technology, they can build you something really cool. It may not meet anybody's needs, but they can absolutely install and build stuff. Because if you don't tell them what you're trying to accomplish with it, you're not going to get what you want out of it. And so that pickle in the middle role is absolutely critical to helping drive those requirements. And then data steward. So I've heard this role of data steward used in a million different ways. I've heard them called custodians. I don't want to be a custodian, so I don't think I should call the people that are helping us to do the care and feeding for our data to be called the custodians. So I like the term stewards. These, and as you can see, there are many more of these. You can think of them as subject matter experts, but they are the ones who know the data in our systems, how it's used. They already know where the problems are. They've been trying to solve problems for years and years and years, but potentially without an outlet to go to. They've been trying to do it themselves, right? So that model you can see it's simple yet complex in that it's a lot of people in the company that have to be pulling together in a structured way in order for this data stuff to come to life, right? So then you start thinking about, all right, so now I need to understand not just our business strategies, but what are the analytic uses for the data? And who are the users of the data? Because if I want to try and alleviate that 60 to 80% of the time that they might be spending, I truly need to understand what they are trying to do and who it is that's trying to do that. So this picture just is a quick snapshot of that. And as you can imagine, I'm going to actually take you to the next one. The vast majority of activities are still heavy in the reporting space. You can see, sort of with some shading on there, that the reporting piece probably goes out much larger and fuller across this continuum than the analytics side does. So you can think of that as being able to automate those things and start to improve that so that we can move people toward analytics, but that again means we need to really understand what people are doing from a reporting and analytics perspective, because I can't build an ecosystem that meets the needs of those users on the previous slide without understanding this. So for us, we've highlighted some pretty big changes that need to happen. And I've been to a number of conferences. These are pretty consistent across most, at least banks or financial services. I doubt Netflix needs to worry about this, but as a bank, we definitely are in this camp, which is how do we start thinking about a more modern data platform? And what does that mean? That means not just the technology platform itself, but if you think about that ecosystem, I did not say on-prem or cloud or hybrid. I didn't give you details about whether this was an Oracle database or a DB2 database, right? This is about that modern data platform that includes things like warehouses, like data marts, operational data stores, big data. It shouldn't be restricted based on where you're putting it or in what vessel you're putting it, right? But ultimately, to make it easier, you have to include all those things. So some of you may have heard in the past that the warehouse is dead. There's not a bank on the planet that has killed off their warehouse. Warehouses are still absolutely a part of a data ecosystem. The trick is, how do you figure out how to pair it with those other items in order to be able to meet all the needs of those analytic users I had on that previous page, right? Because if you're still doing reporting, warehouses still are important. And I don't know any company that isn't still doing management reporting, operational reporting, sales reporting, lots of stuff still happening that's backward looking, right? Next is master data capabilities. So when you think about master data, for us, it's heavy about customer. We are very focused on our customers and making sure that we have customers that have a good, exceptional customer experience. And in order to do that means knowing your customers. And so for us, this master data capability concept could be across products, suppliers. We are personally focused very heavily on customers right now. And that means understanding that full picture of a customer. So there's some basic information about a customer you need to know, and then you want their account details, you want their transactions, you want all the interactions that a customer is having with you to complete that picture. It is incredibly powerful from both a operational standpoint and customer experience, but also from an analytics standpoint. The more data you guys have, the easier it is for you to find some insights that we may not have been able to easily see just by seeing one source of data. This data ecosystem approach, so I mentioned cloud and on-prem and hybrid. When you think about the ecosystem, it really doesn't matter where it lives. So you should be able to span those different environments as well as day-old data, month-old data, real-time data, right? Streaming data. There's a whole host of the types of data that are important when we think about that ecosystem. Integration tools. You can also think of this in the terms of self-service. So whether that is being able to move and integrate your data in a self-service way, doing data prep in a much more simplified manner, using visualization tools. They sort of go together, right, as you think about self-service, and I don't know, again, any companies that don't still have some challenges around making self-service a reality. It's very hard for technologists to give up the power that they've had about who can have access, what tool can they use. It's just there's something built in the technology fabric that says it's a little bit tough for us to give that up. But self-service is critical if we want to be able to get folks from doing traditional reporting into more advanced analytics. Data management tools, kind of like my data management and governance pyramid, the tools are very, very important for us as an organization in the Chief Data Officer role to ensure that we are creating an enterprise-wide data dictionary, an enterprise-wide access to the data quality results of the data, to ensure that we've got tools around lineage so you can actually see where the data came from and now where it's going to. Our regulators expect that of us as a bank as well, and I'm sure many of you have some regulator of some sort that wants that kind of information. Data marketplace. So you may not have heard this term before. I like to describe it as the shopping experience for data. And this is an important component as you think about moving toward something more modern. So on my ecosystem slide, I kind of flew over it, but between organize and consume, I had a layer called data marketplace. So I don't think we're ever going to get to be an Amazon-like shopping experience, but I would be thrilled if it was much easier to find the data set you were looking for without having to have some sort of deep technology experience or know everything about that lending system in order to get to that data. So we are working toward this concept of a data marketplace where we can actually make it much easier for people to shop for the data. That doesn't mean you're going to have a completely casual user. You're still going to have to be somewhere in the data and analytics professions, probably to understand what you're looking at. I don't think I would give my mom, who's a nurse, access to something like that. But the reality is we want to make that much simpler than it is today. And then the fourth component is around an analytics sandbox. So many of you may already have access to this. It is not as streamlined as it should be in most places. So, and just having a sandbox is not the answer to all the challenges, right? So it's one thing to have the sandbox and let a bunch of kids in to play, but there has to be a process by which you go back through, groom it, take out the toys that are buried way deep inside it, and make it then ready for the next analytic testing, right? So if you're going to do that for experimenting, the governance processes that have to be in place need to be there up front, because I'm sure many of you have been given a place to do it, and then somebody shows up and says, hey, you can't do that there. Wait, you're not supposed to be doing that there. We got to take that away. We're changing what we're doing. It's important to have those steps and the processes built up front in order for that analytic sandbox to be a success for a company. So this is not a short list of stuff that needs to change, right, within the company to help make that reality of peanut butter and jelly come through. All that sounded really great. The real problem is the culture change. So we can talk all about all that other almost technical or tactical activities that need to take place. But the changing of hearts and minds is a much slower, harder process than most people think about. You're in your job, you're doing your work, but we're trying to actually change how people think about data and about the value of having that data in order to do analytics and be data-driven and get new insights, right? Any executive would say, yeah, I want to make more money. Awesome. Yes, I want to save some money. Cool. But that doesn't happen without a different type of commitment, not just I want to make some more money, okay? So org design's important. when you think about the organizational design, I talked about those strategic partnerships and the alignment of having a chief data officer, having an enterprise analytics team, having a technology team dedicated to data technologies and analytics, and having the businesses think about their strategies in such a way that it includes what they're trying to do with data and analytics. Capabilities. So we've talked a whole bunch about capabilities, but that is one component of driving this cultural change. And you don't just stand up a warehouse or stand up a big data environment, right? So none of these steps are small in time or effort, right? And that's this challenge of the cultural change. Leadership and cultural alignment. So every company is different. How it gets work done is part of the culture. How people think. I talked about our values, right? Can-do attitude, service, heart, forward thinking. That's important for us to align our data and analytics strategies to that culture. Because I can't move anything forward unless it's in alignment with how we do business within our walls. Stakeholder engagement, we talked about as it relates to those partnerships. I also have I put together recently a spreadsheet of all the people that I would consider stakeholders. It's about 250 people. Imagine engaging with them on a very regular basis to make sure people understand how you're progressing on those changes that were required, understanding what's changing in the business, to link all that back together so that the work we're actually doing is meaningful to them. Learning support. Ultimately, we're going to get to a place, okay, so now we've got all these tools in place. How do we help the new person that just started last week? How do we help the person who's just changing jobs from one place to another and needs to learn the new sets of tools? Right? So the learning component of this goes on forever, but it has to be embedded in what you do from a cultural change perspective, otherwise you won't be able to sustain the change. And ultimately, adoption metrics. So when you think about having any kind of large change program in a company, eventually you have to understand, are people adopting this new way? And where are we falling down? How do we start to improve that? And where could we make it better for folks to make that adoption more easy? I've heard the term data literacy quite a bit lately. And the idea behind data literacy, I heard at a Gartner conference once that everybody in the executive C-suite and board should be data literate. I disagree. I don't think their job is to understand every little nit and nat about data. I need them guiding the big ship of where we're going as a company. There are other people, my role included, our head of analytics included, that need to understand and be very data literate. There are plenty of people that should be data literate. I don't think our executive team and our board of directors has to have the same level of literacy around data, okay? So the idea of adoption means different things to different people, and it's important to think of it that way. I wouldn't expect everybody to have the same level of literacy, all right? Why bother with all this? It's to create a competitive advantage. That's the only reason we're doing this, right? We care about being competitive and getting ahead of competitors, helping our customers, right? So everything I just described is ultimately there to help us accelerate time to market for new insights, for new products, you name it, any kind of innovation we want to do, that speed to market is critical. Having more diverse insights. Sure, we could just wait till somebody else does it and do it after them. We want to be able to get ahead of that, right? And so having that more diverse insights about our customers and our prospects is exactly what we want to be able to do. Having exceptional data where you need it most. The idea behind this and this idea of exceptional data is an important word of that sentence, right? So it's not just getting people access to data. I could give folks access to loan data and deposit data. It'd be pretty simple. But there's an importance around the quality of the data, understanding the data, and making sure it's used in the way that it was intended to be used, right? And lastly, which I was just talking about as we talked about the cultural change and the impact of a change program, is to ultimately create a distinctive data culture for the organization. That is obviously a nice, simple little bullet point that is incredibly hard to deliver on. So I'm going to wrap up here with another little funny, I guess. So do we have any actual insights from our big data in the cloud? Yes, the data shows that my productivity plunges whenever you use new jargon. Maybe in-memory computing will accelerate your applications. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate being here today, and I think we'll be able to take some questions now. I don't know, there's mics out there. Yes. There's some stuff up here. You can, I'll repeat it. I can hear you from here.
So, great presentation. Question about change. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, as things change, how do you bring those changes into this model that you've presented?
So our question was around, as things change, I'm assuming in the company, in the environment, in the industry, how do I bring them into this environment? It's interesting. It is a balancing act, right? Because every change, I'll use technology stuff as probably the best example, right? Stuff is changing by the day in the technology space. We could never build and support that level of change, right? I would have to come up with something new today, tomorrow, et cetera. So how do you balance the importance of what it is you're trying to do strategically with those changes, and when's the right time to start adopting anything new into it, right? We do strategic planning every few years, so we're not trying to change our big picture course too quickly. That's helpful. But there are always small things, a new regulation that we have to then figure out how to adopt. The technology, again, wait till, for us and for banking, I've been at 2 other banks, so I can, I guess, talk fairly confidently about banking, is that the changes, you also want to have some stability in those changes from a technology perspective before you start introducing them. I don't want to go after the new hot thing every time it's introduced. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Hello.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. It's super insightful. I have one question. When did you start on your journey, and considering your vision that you have, how far along are you?
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like I've been on this journey my whole life. My first official role in data as the chief data officer was 7-8 years ago. But I had so many of those pickle-in-the-middle jobs that I had a very strong appreciation for what I would want to see done differently. When you get placed in that, and that was, I worked in the branches, and I was a manager over 12 branches locally. I was responsible for all the reporting and analytics for our investment banking division. You can kind of imagine, like, that's just a whole weird swath of stuff. I did continuous improvement. If anybody's done Six Sigma, data is particularly important. So all of those roles, I think, led to that becoming the chief data officer when I did back in 2012. And as a result of that, I didn't know what I didn't know. I was reflecting on that with my team this week, is that, oh my gosh, I can't believe they let me have that job when they did. The best I could say is that I knew what I didn't know. I didn't even know what I didn't know. And I knew the pain I was trying to solve for business people. And so I love learning. My team is frustrated with me pretty regularly. I read all kinds of, my pleasure reading is data stuff. So as I do that, I start to formulate what this strategy starts to look like, right? And it is also different by company. So you'd say, I work for 3 different banks, I work for 3 regional banks, the same strategy should apply. It doesn't. The culture is a particularly important and powerful either help or impediment to a strategy. So tailoring the strategy to the place you are and the culture that it is an important part. So where are we? I only joined Huntington in May of last year. I moved to Columbus when I did that. I had been in Cleveland before. And as a result, I feel like we are on an early part of the journey. There was a lot of technical capabilities in place, but not necessarily connected to the business need. The businesses were still trying to solve many of their problems in an organic way of finding, cleansing, aggregating, prepping, maintaining all that data. And so we're trying to start to move toward this. So you heard a lot about the stuff that we are early days on in that journey, at least here at Huntington. Yeah, Mike?
Hello.
Oh, over here.
I have a more technical question. You had talked about a
Let's see
data
if I
mart.
can answer it.
Well, I'm at Huntington, by the way, in data and analytics. You talked about a data marketplace where we can go for one source, and you also talked about the importance of a data dictionary. And I was wondering what the strategy was going to be to ensure that everybody across the organization used the same variable for the same report. Like, is there, instead of having to go to 10 Excel files, for example, for what is a savings account balance, you know, is there going to be a centralized, how is that data dictionary across the marketplace going to look?
Yeah, so the marketplace would leverage the data dictionary, would leverage the data quality metrics as well. So once you start measuring quality, you can have a metric associated to a data element that you would include. I don't know that I have an answer for the ensuring everybody uses a given field a particular way in a report. We're working right now on, it's called common loan dimensions, right? But it is bringing together, it's probably about 20, 30 different areas who use loan data to try and understand how they're using it so we can get to a consistent idea around the definition of that data. So it's not there's not a tool that solves that. It is much more about getting people to work together to decide collectively what the answer is. So.
Hi, Ursula.
Yes.
So,
I don't know where I'm looking.
Here.
Oh,
I'm
back.
a recent graduate and now pickle in the middle. How can I help that cultural change that you spoke about in understanding the business teams, which is so key, and I can supply them that data? How can I bridge that gap and spark that cultural change, although I'm more down the line?
Yeah, it's interesting that my role at Huntington had been held by a version of what I would call my role today. So there had been a gentleman who had our data warehouse and had been trying to play that chief data officer role, okay? And the connections to the people for what it is they're trying to solve and all those pickle in the middle having a voice, they didn't have a mechanism for that. So it was a grassroots effort actually to fill my job, if you can imagine that. So there was a former data governance committee in the company, and there were about 7 people on that said, there has got to be a better way. This is not working for us as a company, and we can't individually solve it from where we sit, right? All those pickles cannot suddenly figure out that we're going to solve it in a collective way. We need some executive leadership around that. So they actually put together materials that proposed the creation of this role. And I think that is powerful, right? Because there is the ability to suggest how it could be done, and you have just as much power to do that to whomever is in some leadership. So they took this proposal to our executive leadership team at the time, and there was even a debate on where it should report. Should it report into our COO, our CFO, our chief risk officer? What's the best place for the role as well? And they had made recommendations in their pitch about the role and where it should report and what the role should do and the benefits that they would get from the role. I was thrilled. I had no idea, right, when I ended up getting the job that had happened in preparation for them actually posting the role. And I think folks in that pickle role can ask for some change, especially if there's a few of you that really feel passionate about what change you want to see.
I have a quick question. I feel like being a chief data officer is like a big job, at least in my perspective, and I admire you for being that. I feel tricky, especially with respect to the data quality. Nobody notices anything if everything goes well, but every day is not a good day. If something goes wrong in terms of the data quality, that's when you are put on the rough spot.
Yep.
How do you deal with that kind of situations?
So let me start by saying Chief Data Officer is the coolest job on the planet. I am incredibly fortunate to have the greatest job ever. I love it. I'm sure other people think I am nuts for loving this job, but I do love it. And what you described around data quality is the normal challenge. It's not much different than the question about change, right? And how do you deal with change, right? That is some of the fun. That I have no idea what's going to come at us today, tomorrow, the next day. New things happen in the world, in the marketplace, in the industry, with technology. Something that nobody cared about the quality of yesterday, everybody cares about the quality of today. That's the best part of it. I mean, it makes it fun. I don't really see that as a like drag me down. Oh goodness, now everybody's focused on this. It's sort of just the beauty of the role, because it does require constant change and constant learning, which I find exhilarating. So, did they have a mic for you?
I don't know, but
Yeah, I can at least hear you, and I'll repeat it.
You went into a company where you've had a program where you've had to mature the program. Any data program has a plethora of stakeholders.
Yes.
How are you communicating data changes to that community, and how often do you do that?
So our question is around, with the number of stakeholders in an environment like this, how do I go about communicating data changes on a regular and repeatable basis? So it's not really about the data changes itself. It's about the direction that we're headed, right? And because there wouldn't be a mechanism for just, hey, we're changing this, or something happened with this field. That would be people would be inundated with that sort of thing. But we are building out a few different things around our stewardship community, which is one vehicle for communication, what I'm calling a reporting and analytics community of practice within the company as well, so that we can start to bring together those resources that are actually using the data. That will provide us a more direct communication vehicle that doesn't exist today, because it's very hard to get to actual users. If I used our system to try and identify people with a title of analytics analyst or anything in that, I would have almost everybody in the bank is some sort of version of that. So it's very difficult to actually find the people that care about that data and to be able to use it. And so our community of practice will be one of those vehicles that we'll be able to use. So, am I out of time?
How about one more?
One more, okay.
Is the role of chief data officer, do you think, is an IT function or a business function or a new function?
My favorite question. So his question was, is the role of the chief data officer an IT function, a business function, or something other? I said favorite question because it is a business function. Sorry, it just is. The reason I say that is because from a technology perspective, I think of my technology team as helping enable the work that we're doing, but I speak for the business. So when you think of a data dictionary or you think of master data, you do not go get requirements from random individual business people. You have to have a business team that can articulate those types of requirements. If I just showed up and asked the sales guy, what's your metadata requirements, he's going to look at me like I'm nuts. But I have to have a team that does that, right? And so that makes me the business requirements side for our technology team to develop and help me implement and make those capabilities come to life. So for me, it is a business function. It is not a technology function. And in many companies, they say it should report directly to the CEO. I mean, the CEO's got 1 million direct reports already. This is one more role. I report at Huntington into our chief operating officer. So our CIO is a peer. The head of operations is a peer. I think it's a perfect way for the role to come together because it is about a new operational function for the bank. So thank you.
Please help me welcome Ursula. Thank you very much.
You.
That was terrific. Awesome, awesome talk. So we have a break. At the break, please do try to go down and vote for a data viz competition, whoever you want to win. Strategy will be back in here in about 10 minutes, and we'll get started with Yvonne, who's going to bring you some awesome insights around diversity and analytics.